Hello, and welcome once again to Frankly, Why Am I Here? Why are you here? Why is Walter disturbingly proficient at moonwalking?
Hey guys, I know you were probably expecting me to do some sort of funny cutaway where I show you how good I am at moonwalking. Unfortunately, you are wrong.
Correct! Woo! Thank you, President Reagan, for instituting a minimum national drinking age in these United States of America. It was breaking my heart to see all those beautiful children drinking and driving.
Well, as to the two mysteries that we first introduced, I'm here today to continue my series on explaining Pascendi, the masterpiece of Pope St. Pius X, Pascendi Dominici Gregis, Feeding the Flock, which produced a catechism on modernism in 1908. This was the attempt by Reverend Lemius to bring this majestic encyclical to a wider public audience. What it does is explains what the errors of modernism are, where they came from, and how to correct them. We're going to be looking at chapter 4 of the first part, which treats with the modernist errors. And what we're going to do is we're going to continue comparing them to what the modern church says today. Spice warning. In previous episodes, I've explained an introduction to a catechism on modernism. Then we looked at the initial chapter, which shows that the modernist idea of religion was to basically replace God with man, Christ with human beliefs, a human or person-centered religion of human feelings, of sentiments appropriate to the political and social conditions of the time. We saw in another previous episode how this produced a modern cult of synodality, which is of course not the Catholic religion and is in fact practically a catechism of all the errors of modernism condemned in Pascendi itself. This is the reason why it is so important that you have a look at a catechism on modernism. This will explain to you what is going on in the church today. It will explain to you why you should not despair, why you should not lose your faith, for the Catholic religion remains eternal, but the modernist one is temporal. It's a religion of our times. And in this episode, I will explain to you why it is the elevation of politics to the status of religion. Today's episode is on modernism, a political religion. The synodal project is simply a political religion of liberal ideas. This is not simply my view, nor is it alone the view that you will derive from reading Pascendi yourself in a catechism of modernism. It is also the view of a leading theologian from the Vatican, Professor William A. Thomas. Now, I'm acquainted with Professor Thomas. I speak to him on the regular. And recently he gave an interview to LifeSite News in which he explained that the synodal religion is not the Catholic religion.
Synodality has been disastrous for the Catholic Church. As St. Paul would say, rubbish, rubbish, rubbish. It's rubbish. No bishop who has a spine can accept this.
He is a theologian. He is a leading, or perhaps the world's leading, Mariologist, a specialist in Marian apparitions. He has served every pope, or indeed underneath every pope, since John Paul II, and has been in the Vatican longer than most of the cardinals. He was a school friend of Robert Prevost, who became the Pope as well. And so this man's opinion carries significant theological authority. He is not, unlike certain people such as myself, a radical traditional religious extremist. And yet he too has pronounced that the new religion is not the true religion, and is in fact a revolutionary liberal cult. His view is that synodality is based upon the social contractarianism of Rousseau, a revolutionary thought which effectively replaces the natural order of God with the words of revolutionaries like himself. This is the reason why we see the Vatican celebrating an integral humanism. This is the reason why its apostolic letters frequently mention the person-centered nature of religion, and why its truth must be sought together between ourselves, rather than being revealed by God himself. So today, I want to explore to you what chapter 4 means. It talks again about the modernist errors that are introduced in chapter 1 of Pascendi, or a catechism of modernism. Now, I have been triggered once again. Walter saw fit to trigger me again during a telephone conversation, which I regrettably have to submit to in order to pretend that I respect him and to maintain the appearance of a functional working relationship. During this, he said to me, look, the book says a catechism of modernism. And I rejoined to him that when it was originally published, it was actually called A Catechism on Modernism. So yes, it's the same book. Unfortunately, it is published under two slightly different names. The original was On, the later one by 10 Books is Of, and there it is. Chapter 4 of A Catechism of Modernism begins by explaining how the modernists want to change the dogma, the teaching, and the practice of the Catholic religion to suit modernist political religious beliefs. They call this the shoots of the faith. Pope St. Pius X earlier warned us of the bad disguise donned by the modernists in order to promote their modernism as the true religion. This bad disguise includes routine appeals to historical figures and developments in the Church, in order that we can skip over the intervening period, which is the magisterium of the Church of the past 1,000 years, and thereby modernise it. This is a trick. What is this trying to produce? It's obvious that the third phase of the Synod on Synodality is seeking to produce something of a liberal democracy in the organisational culture of the Church, to replace its structure beforehand. Why, you might ask, are the modernists seeking to wed the bride of Christ to the spirit of the age instead? Pascendi explains this, rendered in question and answer form in A Catechism on Modernism. It says, if the Church does not show herself pliant towards this doctrine of the modernists, what do they say will be the penalty for the Catholic religion? The penalty of refusal, say the modernists, is disaster, for it is madness to think that the sentiment of liberty can surrender. Were it forcibly confined and held in bonds, terrible would be its outbursts, sweeping away at once both church and religion. This means that the modernist argument is, if you don't change the Church to reflect the liberal political beliefs of the time, then it won't be relevant anymore. In order for the Church to survive, remain relevant, it must become liberal and preach the liberal state religion instead of the Catholic one, which is what it does today. A Catechism of Modernism then asks, what, finally, is the great anxiety of the modernists? It says their great anxiety is, in consequence, to find a way of conciliation between the authority of Church and the liberty of believers. What does that mean? It means the chief concern of the modernists is to try and make the teachings of the Church and the beliefs of liberals the same thing. The modernists are saying here that if the Church does not change, it cannot survive these modern times. This is akin to saying that if the patient does not commit suicide, he will die. If you're wondering why there's been so much effort undertaken to destroy the architectural beauty of Catholic churches, to deprive the common man and woman of the sublime beauty of the traditional Mass and its incomparably heavenly singing. If you're wondering why this is a case, and why the traditional Mass must be abolished, Pascendi goes into that as well. And it says that to the modernist, the external pomp of the Church jars with modern liberal ideas, and so it must be removed. What it means is, if you subtract everything from the Catholic Church that literally indicates divine beauty, that is timeless, that is not of these liberal consumer times, if instead it comes to resemble a liberal consumer nihilist spectacle, there will be no escape from the liberal consumer nihilism that the global system seeks to institute everywhere. In short, it will be just the same as every other product on sale in the liberal system. It will celebrate the same values: the climate cult, mass migration, the rainbow flag. It will have screens in there, as many churches do now. It will have a mass that's directed towards the people and not towards God, as most churches indeed do now. It will remove the altar and place what's called cranmer tables there instead. This is to liberalise the Church in its architecture, its ritual, in its aesthetics, to the point where it becomes indistinguishable from any other consumer liberal product, in terms of the values that it's selling and in terms of its cheap presentation. This is a form of spiritual, and indeed practical impoverishment. Beauty indicates God. All beauty indicates God ultimately, and the modern church worships modern man instead. It worships modern machines and the morality that's produced by these machines. To witness God's glory in the monuments of his church is to be placed in our rightful perspective. We remember it's not all about us. This is the meaning of this chapter in Pascendi. It's showing you the consequences of the belief in modernist political religion in place of the Catholic religion. It's showing you the practical consequences of the elevation of liberal beliefs to the status of religion. What does this tell us about the modern liberal world? Modern liberalism, in its economics and politics, can be understood as a process of worldwide standardization to make everything the same products, the same policies, the same morality, the same politics, and indeed the same one world religion, which is what appears to have been produced in the synodal project, which increasingly relies on a kind of theology of ecology and strong criticism of anything that opposes the liberal global agenda, such as open borders and LGBTQ. This matters because the bridge made to God, the Pontifex, that's the pons, bridge in Latin, and facere, to make, the bridge that is made to God, is broken by these means, and thereby all we have left is ourselves, is just man trapped in his own inventions. This is what chapter 4 of Pascendi explains to you. It continues to tell you that the modernists will argue that this is a form of progress, or indeed the evolution of dogma, a point that was raised in earlier chapters. What is the principal factor in the evolution of the church, it asks. Evolution of the church itself is fed by the need of accommodating itself to historical conditions and of harmonizing itself with existing forms of society. The false doctrine of evolution is used to justify the modernist revolution in the church, saying that the church must, by necessity, according to this principle of evolution, change itself to suit the political and moral beliefs of the time. The next section of chapter 4 is called Practical Consequences. We can see these practical consequences around us today. As I said, the speech of Professor William A. Thomas shows that the Vatican is in fact teaching a new religion that is not the Catholic religion, that is composed not only of modernist errors, but which celebrates a doctrine that is largely composed of the political and social beliefs of the prevailing liberal order with global ambitions. In a remarkable passage, this section on practical consequences of the religious belief of the modernists shows why they clutch their pearls and are so outraged when you accuse them of what they are doing. It says, when reprimanded or punished by the religious authority, what do the modernists express? With all this in mind, the answer comes, one understands how it is that the modernists express astonishment when they are reprimanded or punished. What is imputed to them as a fault, they regard as a sacred duty. Being in intimate contact with consciences they know better than anyone else, and certainly better than the ecclesiastical authority. What needs exist? They embody them, so to speak, in themselves. Having a voice and a pen they use both publicly, for this is their duty as they see it. Let authority rebuke them as much as it pleases, they have their own consciences on their side, and intimate experience which tells them with certainty that what they deserve is not blame, but praise. This passage explains why the modernists react with outrage, scandalized indeed, when you tell them that they are preaching errors condemned by the church. They say, no, you're wrong. It's our sacred duty to preach these errors because our feelings tell us so. And why is that so persuasive to modernists? I've come up with a concept myself that might help you. I call it liberal chauvinism. It basically reduces to this. The liberals think anyone who disagrees with them is either an idiot or a dangerous lunatic and necessarily wrong. This is chauvinism, the dismissal of any other's point of view without reasonable grounds, whilst referring to your own as inviolably correct. How do the liberals arrive at this position? They believe they are better than you and me and everyone else because of what they believe. This is a circular argument or an axiom, which basically says, I believe it, it's true, lol. You can understand how this is applied practically elsewhere, where people say, well, if I believe I'm a woman whilst being a man, then I am a woman. If I believe I'm English and I get a passport, then I am English. If I believe I'm a Catholic, despite spouting a stream of constant errors which are condemned as heresy and anathema to the church, then I am a Catholic. It's I identify as this. That's this belief system. The liberal belief system says we are better because we believe in liberal beliefs, and a foundational belief of liberals is that whatever they believe is reality and is true, and therefore anyone who disagrees is insane and wrong. Lol. Again, also not lol. The reason why this lol is not lol is because it leads to the profound despair and confusion of millions of Catholics worldwide who cannot comprehend what is going on in the modern church. It is a simple fact explained in and predicted by Pascendi that the synodal cult is a modernist religion composed of modern liberal political beliefs. And it is not Catholic. There is in fact no crisis in the Catholic faith whatsoever if you look at what it is. The crisis is created by people who identify as Catholic, who tell you things that contradict the Catholic religion and tell you that that is the Catholic religion itself. It is a counterfeit. If these modernists are heretics, fair question you might ask, why don't they just leave the church? The penultimate section on practical consequences explains this. It says, why then do the modernists pretend to submit? Why do they not rather leave the church as heretics? The answer is this policy they follow willingly and wittingly because it is part of their system that authority is to be stimulated but not dethroned, and because it is necessary for them to remain within the ranks of the church in order that they may gradually transform the collective conscience. So here we can see that Pope St. Pius X predicted that the modernists will stay within the church in order to transform the collective consciousness of what the church teaches and what it is, so they can change it to suit their own ends. You might recall a remark from Leo, I think last September, where he was interviewed by Crux on the question of the acceptance of unrepentant homosexual practices. And he said something like, we have to wait for attitudes to change.
People want church doctrine to change, want attitudes to change. I think we have to change attitudes before we ever change doctrine.
The idea here is that the project being undertaken in the modern church, as we can see in synodality, is to change the attitudes of what people believe the Catholic religion is in order to reconcile it, as Pascendi said, with the prevailing political and moral beliefs of the time. Now, the moral beliefs of the time themselves are no longer unitary or stable. There's a serious problem with the international liberal order, and that's that it isn't international anymore. The United States has left the game. It was the main sponsor of liberalism with global ambitions, and it is now diametrically opposed to that project, serving instead the national interest and an obvious platform of God, family and country, which arguably, and I would argue this, reflects practically directly the Catholic social teachings concept of the correct order of the state. In place of that, Pope Leo bewails the fact that the United States is now abandoning an international system which necessarily requires that nations are dissolved into it. This obviously undermines sovereignty, which comes from God, and replaces it with a liberal order of liberal rights and liberal laws into which all nations are to be dissolved. In my opinion, I think that Robert Prevost was elected in part, if not mainly, to provide a counterpoint to Donald Trump. He is the anti-Trump. The Daily Beast published an article this week which predicted a clash between the woke Pope and Donald Trump. There's a meeting coming up between the two, and obviously Trump's policies contradict exactly those of the liberal state religion, which synodality under Leo promotes as an article of faith. This is the reason why the pronouncement that the modern church is in fact a political religion of liberalism, a revolutionary idea that is not Catholic, is of diplomatic as well as religious significance. If you'd like to see in precise detail why it is obvious that Pope Leo is promoting the liberal state religion, its cult of human rights, based upon the philosophy of Rousseau, a revolutionary, whose contractarian arguments lead to the concept of international law, a fiction invented by liberals. If you would like to know in detail why Leo's recent defence of human rights is in fact not Catholic, then you can look at my Substack where I discuss this in detail. He gave a statement recently to the consistory in which involved him addressing the diplomatic corps of the Vatican. And in that, he speaks about rights, but not about the order of rights from the natural order as explained by, for example, St. Thomas Aquinas, nor indeed the order as explained in the Catholic social teaching of Leo XIII. No, his idea of rights comes from the Catholic social teaching which was revised by the Modernists and published as a compendium in 2005. If you think that this is a bit heavy or controversial, I would invite you to have a look at my series on the Catholic social teaching, which is also on Substack, and compare it with the compendium published in 2005 by the Vatican. You will see that my argument that the modern concept of the Catholic social teaching is in fact a collection of liberal rights-based arguments that reduce to arguments like Rousseau, the revolutionaries, utilitarianism, basically a godless arithmetic of morality, with really nothing to do with the divinely created natural order. This is quite a recondite philosophical point, but it's one that I think can be defended entirely if we get into detail, and I do go into some of that detail on my Substack. Leo's speech to the diplomatic corps of the Vatican, it basically says things that aren't true about the church, that aren't true about 20th century history. He makes basic historical, logical and theological errors, which I show in the Substack as being errors and why they are, in comparison to what is taught in part 4 of the first part of Pascendi. So you can see for yourself, and I invite you to do so. It's not really about what I think. It's not really about me at all. What I'm doing here is I'm showing you this is what the church taught before the revolution. After the revolution, it teaches revolutionary ideas. Those ideas are liberal political beliefs elevated to the status of religion, and they are presented to a Catholic public by invoking figures such as St. Augustine and the early fathers of the church and so on. And this is a trick which was also explained in the beginning of Pascendi by Pope St. Pius X, when he mentioned the bad disguise that the modernists would adopt in order to do precisely what they're doing today. Quite a lot of modern synodalists who identify as Catholics are simply doing the meme today. Here's one of them. Walter, would you please put up the coping and seething Karl Marx meme? Perhaps an even spicier meme is this one, where a sort of rainbow Christ is pictured and imagined and put in his place by people who want you to promote the prevailing cultural and social norms of the time as Christianity, rather than looking at what the Catholic Church teaches instead. In summary, why are the modernists doing this? What are its practical consequences? Why should you care about it? Why should you read a catechism of modernism to arm yourself against this destructive project which will mislead you into errors and will imperil the salvation of your soul? Why? Well, here's another pope who is mentioned in the final passage of chapter 4, Pope Pius IX. Now, he wrote, "These enemies of divine revelation extol human progress to the skies, and with rash and sacrilegious daring would have it introduced into the Catholic religion as if this religion were not the work of God but of man, or some kind of philosophical discovery susceptible of perfection by human efforts." That's the encyclical of Pope Pius IX, Qui Pluri, 9th November 1846. It clearly explains what the aim is here: to replace the worship of Christ with that of man, and to thereby reduce it to an ongoing project of quasi-philosophical innovation, wherewith you tinker with the dogma according to your political beliefs, and tell us that this is necessary to keep the religion alive, when in fact it is an attempt to perform an assisted suicide upon it. This is impossible, of course, because the Catholic religion can neither be destroyed nor perverted in this manner. It remains what it is. The problem is that so many people are being misled by an impostor, which is synodality, and which is composed of the religious beliefs of the modernists explained in Chapter 4 of a Catechism of Modernism. I hope to have explained to you in some detail why you should not despair, and what is going on in the modern church, and indeed why it is so important that you educate yourself in the teachings of the faithful popes of the Catholic religion, because it will enlighten you and save you from misery and confusion, and of course, ultimately, from the flames of hell. With that in mind, goodbye for now. God bless you all, and I hope to see you again on Frankly next time.
Obviously, you can't laugh.
Okay, sorry.